I used to think summer was the safest time of the year. There was no school, no early mornings, and no cold weather. The days felt endless. The sun stayed out late, and everything seemed alive. Kids rode bikes through the neighborhood. Lawn mowers buzzed across green yards. Sprinklers clicked back and forth. Ice cream trucks moved slowly down the streets. That summer started exactly like every other summer. I was 16 years old. My parents both worked long hours, so I spent most days by myself. We lived in a small town surrounded by fields, empty roads, and patches of woods. It was the kind of place where everybody knew everybody. At least that's what people like to believe. The first week of June was incredibly hot. Every day felt heavier than the one before. The air barely moved. Even at night, the heat stayed trapped between houses and roads. Most afternoons, I rode my bike around town just to escape boredom. One day, while riding near the edge of town, I noticed a narrow gravel road I had never paid attention to before. I knew the area well, but somehow I had never gone down that road. Curious, I followed it. The road stretched through tall grass and dry fields. Crickets screamed from both sides. The further I went, the quieter everything became. After about 10 minutes, I saw an old farmhouse sitting alone in the distance. The place looked abandoned. The paint had faded years ago. Several windows were broken. The front porch leaned slightly to one side. Weeds covered most of the yard. I stopped my bike and stared at it. It gave me a strange feeling. Not because it looked haunted, because it looked like someone had left in a hurry. The front door hung slightly open. A rusty pickup truck sat beside a shed. The truck looked old but not ancient. It didn't belong to a place forgotten for decades. I stood there for a minute before turning around and riding home. I didn't think much about it after that. At least not until a few days later. That afternoon, I was scrolling through local news online when I found an article about a missing man from years earlier. The article was old. The man had disappeared during the summer. The picture showed a middle-aged farmer. The strange thing was where he had lived. The address matched the farmhouse. I felt a chill despite the heat. The article said investigators never found evidence of what happened. The man simply vanished. His truck had remained on the property. The case eventually went cold. I remembered the truck. The same truck was still there. That night I couldn't stop thinking about it. The next morning I went back. I told myself I was just curious. The truth was I wanted answers. The farmhouse looked exactly the same. The front door was still open. I parked my bike near the road and walked closer. The grass reached my knees. Every step felt loud. The porch creaked beneath my weight. Inside, the house smelled like dust, mold, and old wood. Sunlight entered through broken windows. Furniture remained scattered throughout the rooms. A table sat overturned in the kitchen. Old newspapers covered parts of the floor. Everything looked frozen in time. I slowly explored the house. Most rooms were empty. Nothing seemed unusual. Then I found the basement door. It stood at the end of a hallway. The door was closed. For some reason, it bothered me. Every other door in the house stood open. Only this one remained shut. I stared at it for several seconds. My stomach tightened. Eventually, I reached for the handle. The metal felt hot. I opened the door. Dark stairs disappeared below. The air rising from the basement felt colder than the rest of the house. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight. Each step groaned beneath my feet. Dust floated through the beam of light. At the bottom, I found a large storage area. Shelves lined the walls. Boxes sat stacked in corners. Old tools hung from hooks. Nothing looked terrifying. Nothing looked criminal. Still, something felt wrong. I couldn't explain it. Then I noticed a section of wall near the back. The concrete looked newer than everything around it. The color was slightly different. The surface was smoother. I moved closer. Someone had patched that section years ago. Maybe decades. I touched it. Solid. I told myself it meant nothing, but I couldn't stop staring at it. Eventually, I left. For the rest of the day, I couldn't focus on anything else. That night, I searched for more information about the missing farmer. I found old newspaper archives. Several articles mentioned arguments between the farmer and a business partner. The partner had been questioned during the investigation. Nothing was ever proven. No arrests were made. The case died. But the more I read, the more uneasy I became. The next day I returned again. This time I brought a small shovel. Looking back, it was a stupid decision. I wasn't a detective. I wasn't even an adult. But curiosity pushed me forward. The basement felt even colder that day. Sweat covered my skin from the summer heat outside. Yet the basement made me shiver. I knelt near the patched wall. My heart pounded. I began scraping at the edge. The concrete chipped surprisingly easily. A small piece broke away. Then another. Minutes passed. Dust filled the air. Finally, I uncovered a narrow gap. A horrible smell drifted out. Not strong. Not fresh. Just old. Very old. I immediately backed away. Fear rushed through me. Every instinct screamed that I should leave. And I did. I ran all the way outside. I grabbed my bike and rode home faster than I ever had before. For hours I sat in my room thinking. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe there was a dead animal inside the wall. Maybe I was overreacting. But deep down I knew something wasn't right. The next morning I contacted the police. I didn't tell them every detail. I simply explained what I found. An officer agreed to check the property. Part of me expected them to laugh. They didn't. 2 days later, several police vehicles appeared at the farmhouse. The entire area was blocked off. For hours investigators moved around the property. Then more vehicles arrived. Crime scene units. My stomach dropped. Something had been found. The news spread through town quickly. Nobody knew the details at first. Rumors exploded everywhere. By evening, the truth began to emerge. Human remains had been discovered inside the basement wall. The remains belonged to the missing farmer. Even after all those years, investigators were able to identify him. The town was shocked. People who barely remembered the case suddenly talked about nothing else. For me, everything felt unreal. The farmhouse that had seemed like a random abandoned building now felt completely different. A crime scene. A grave. A secret hidden for years. The investigation reopened immediately. Detectives reviewed old evidence. They re-examined witness statements. They looked into the farmer's former business partner again. Modern forensic testing revealed things investigators decades earlier could never have discovered. The case moved quickly. Within weeks, authorities announced an arrest. The business partner, now much older, was charged with murder. Evidence suggested the two men had argued over money. The argument had become violent. The farmer was killed inside his own home. The body was hidden within the basement wall. The killer assumed nobody would ever find it. For years, he was right. The arrest made national news. Reporters came to town. Everyone wanted the story. I hated the attention. I wished I had never gotten involved. At first I thought finding the truth would bring relief. Instead, it brought nightmares. Every night I imagined that basement. I imagined the darkness, the wall, the years, the silence. I kept thinking about how close I had come to walking away forever. If I had ignored my curiosity, the remains might have stayed hidden for many more years, maybe forever. Summer continued around me as if nothing had happened. Kids still rode bicycles. Families still had barbecues. Ice cream trucks still passed through neighborhoods. The sun still shined. But everything felt different. I had learned something unsettling. Terrible things don't always happen in dark alleys or distant cities. Sometimes they happen in ordinary places, quiet places, places people pass every day without a second thought. Months later, the trial began. The evidence was overwhelming. The jury found the man guilty. The missing persons case that had haunted the town for years was finally solved. The farmer's surviving relatives attended the sentencing. For the first time, they knew what happened. For the first time, they could stop wondering. That mattered more than anything. Years have passed since that summer. The farmhouse was eventually demolished. The land was cleared. Today, if you drive down that gravel road, you won't see much. Just grass, open sky, empty fields, no broken windows, no leaning porch, no abandoned truck. Nothing remains of the house, but I still remember every detail. I remember the heat rising from the road. I remember the sound of insects in the fields. I remember the dust inside the house. I remember standing in front of that basement door. Most of all, I remember the feeling that something wasn't right. People often think horror comes from monsters, ghosts, or supernatural things. What I learned that summer was much worse. Real horror comes from knowing that a person can hide the truth for years. Real horror comes from understanding how easily a normal place can hide something terrible. The case ended. The killer went to prison. The victim was finally found. The family finally received answers. Everything was resolved. But every summer, when the air becomes heavy and the days grow long, I think about that farmhouse again. I think about the road leading through the fields. I think about the basement. And I remember that sometimes the scariest things are completely real. That is why, even now, summer never feels quite as safe as it once did. The summer I turned 16 was the hottest summer I could remember. Every morning felt heavy before the sun was even fully up. The air outside looked almost blurry from the heat. The roads shimmered in the distance, and the grass around our town had turned yellow weeks earlier. People stayed inside whenever they could. By noon, the streets were usually empty. I lived in a small town surrounded by fields, dirt roads, and patches of forest. Nothing exciting ever happened there. Most days felt exactly the same. That summer, my parents both worked long hours. My dad drove trucks across the state, and my mom worked double shifts at a nursing home. I spent most of my time alone. First, I enjoyed it. I slept late, played games, watched videos, rode my bike around town, and stayed up until 2 in the morning. But after a few weeks, boredom started getting to me. One afternoon, while riding my bike on an old road near the edge of town, I found a place I had never paid much attention to before. It was an abandoned campground. I knew it existed, but I had never gone inside. The entrance was blocked by a rusted metal gate hanging crooked on broken hinges. A faded wooden sign stood nearby. Most of the paint had peeled away, but I could still read part of the name. The campground had closed years ago. Nobody really talked about it anymore. Curious, I leaned my bike against the fence and climbed through a gap beside the gate. The place looked frozen in time. Old picnic tables sat under dead trees. Weeds pushed through cracked pavement. Empty camping spots stretched across the property. The deeper I walked, the quieter everything became. Even the insects seemed quieter there. The heat felt different too. The air was thick and still. I spent nearly an hour exploring. Most of the buildings were locked or falling apart. Near the back of the campground stood a maintenance building. Its windows were boarded up. The roof sagged slightly in the middle. Something about it caught my attention. Maybe because it looked more secure than everything else. While walking around it, I noticed fresh tire tracks in the dirt. I stopped immediately. Fresh. Not old. Fresh. The dirt was dry everywhere else, but these tracks looked recent. I remember staring at them. The campground was abandoned. Nobody was supposed to be there. For a moment, I thought maybe workers came occasionally to inspect the property. That seemed reasonable. I left soon after. But I kept thinking about those tire tracks. The next day I returned. And the day after that. Every time I visited, I noticed little things. A crushed water bottle that hadn't been there before. Fresh footprints. A cigarette butt. A recently cut branch. Signs that somebody was using the property. I never actually saw anyone, but somebody was definitely there. Instead of staying away, my curiosity grew stronger. I began exploring farther. One afternoon, I discovered a narrow dirt path behind the maintenance building. Tall weeds hid most of it. It looked like it hadn't been used in years. The path led into a section of woods behind the campground. The trees provided some relief from the heat. The temperature dropped slightly beneath the shade. I followed the path for almost 10 minutes before finding something unexpected. A small clearing. And in the clearing sat a white cargo van. My stomach tightened instantly. The van looked out of place. No company logos. No license plate on the back. Dark windows. The engine wasn't running. I froze. For several seconds, I simply stared at it. The woods around me were completely silent. I suddenly felt exposed, like I shouldn't be there, like somebody could be watching me. I backed away slowly. Then I turned around and walked back toward the campground. I didn't run. I didn't want to make noise, but every second felt wrong. I couldn't explain it. I just wanted to leave. When I finally got back to my bike, I rode home faster than usual. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the van. I told myself there was probably a harmless explanation. Maybe someone stored equipment there. Maybe hunters used the area. Maybe it belonged to workers. But none of those explanations felt right. The missing plate bothered me. The hidden location bothered me. Everything about it bothered me. For several days I stayed away. Then curiosity won again. I went back. This time I brought my phone fully charged. I wanted proof that I had actually seen the van. The afternoon was brutally hot. Sweat soaked through my shirt before I even reached the campground. I followed the same path through the woods. The clearing came into view. The van was still there. My heartbeat sped up. I crouched behind bushes. The van looked exactly the same. I pulled out my phone, zoomed in, took several pictures. As I lowered the phone, movement caught my eye. The side door of the van was slightly open. I hadn't noticed that before. The gap was only a few inches wide, just enough to see darkness inside. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the door moved, very slightly. My blood ran cold. Somebody was inside. I immediately backed away, slowly, quietly, one step at a time. Then I heard something, metal scraping, the van door opening wider. I didn't wait. I turned around and ran. Branches slapped my face. Leaves crunched beneath my shoes. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. I didn't look back. Not once. I reached the campground, kept running, grabbed my bike, pedaled as hard as I could. The entire ride home felt like a nightmare. Every passing car made me jump. Every shadow made me nervous. When I got home, I locked the door behind me. I spent the evening staring at the photos on my phone. The more I looked at them, the worse I felt. Something was wrong. Very wrong. I considered telling my parents. But I knew how it would sound. An abandoned campground. A van in the woods. A feeling that something seemed suspicious. It wasn't much, so I kept it to myself. 3 nights later, I woke up around 1 in the morning. My room felt unbearably hot. I grabbed a glass of water and checked my phone. The local news app showed a breaking story. A teenage boy from a neighboring town had been reported missing. My stomach dropped. The article didn't say much, only that he had disappeared earlier that week. Police were searching nearby areas. I stared at the screen. Then another thought hit me. The neighboring town wasn't far away. Less than 30 minutes. I suddenly thought about the van. I tried convincing myself it was unrelated, but the feeling wouldn't leave. The next morning, I finally showed my dad the photos. He studied them carefully. His expression changed. Then he asked where I had taken them. I told him everything. The campground, the tire tracks, the clearing, the van, the moving door. He became very serious. That afternoon, he contacted local police. I felt embarrassed at first. Part of me thought I had overreacted. Maybe they would investigate and find nothing. Maybe it would all seem ridiculous. 2 days later, everything changed. Police vehicles flooded the area. Roads were blocked. Officers searched the campground and surrounding woods. News helicopters appeared overhead. People gathered near the entrances. Rumors spread through town. Nobody knew exactly what was happening. Then the truth came out. The van was connected to multiple crimes. Authorities had been searching for the vehicle for weeks. The man using it wasn't a worker. He wasn't a hunter. He wasn't supposed to be there at all. He was a violent criminal who had been moving between abandoned properties across several counties. The campground had become one of his temporary hiding places. Police found evidence linking him to several ongoing investigations. When the news broke, I felt sick. I kept imagining how close I had come. The clearing, the van, the moving door. The fact that somebody had been inside while I stood there taking pictures. The man was eventually arrested after a large search operation. I followed every update. Each new detail made me more uncomfortable. Investigators believed he had been watching the campground entrance regularly. He knew when people came and went. He knew the area well. The thought stayed with me for months. Sometimes I would replay everything in my head. What if I had walked closer? What if I had looked inside? What if I had visited later in the evening? What if I had stayed a little longer? Summer eventually ended. School started again. Life slowly returned to normal. But I never forgot that experience. The abandoned campground was later fenced off completely. Eventually, the property was sold. Most of the old buildings were demolished. Today, almost nothing remains. If you drive past it, you would never know what happened there. You would see empty land and a few scattered trees. Nothing more. But whenever summer arrives and the heat becomes heavy enough to make the air shimmer above the road, I remember that place. I remember the silent woods. I remember the hidden clearing. I remember the white van. Most of all, I remember how close I came to something real. Not a ghost. Not a monster. Not some supernatural creature hiding in the dark. Just a human being. And that's what still makes it frightening. The campground had looked harmless from the outside. The woods had looked peaceful. The summer day had felt ordinary. Yet hidden only a short distance away was someone capable of terrible things. That experience changed the way I see danger. I learned that real horror doesn't always announce itself. It doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it sits quietly behind a rusted gate on a hot summer afternoon. Sometimes it hides in places people have forgotten. And sometimes the most terrifying moment is realizing that the danger was real the entire time. Years later, I still have those photographs saved on an old hard drive. I've looked at them only a few times. The images aren't shocking. They're just pictures of a white van sitting in a clearing. Nothing about them seems scary at first glance. But I know what was happening beyond the frame. I know what I almost walked toward. And that's enough. The missing boy from the neighboring town was eventually found alive. He had managed to escape and help investigators identify the man responsible. Several other cases were solved afterward, and families who had spent months searching for answers finally received them. Knowing that gave me some peace. The story didn't end with another disappearance. It didn't end with unanswered questions. The man was arrested, prosecuted, and sentenced. The campground was cleared. The investigations were completed. The people involved were finally able to move forward. As for me, I never returned to explore abandoned places again. Not because I became afraid of ghosts or haunted buildings. I stopped because I learned something far more important. Sometimes the danger is real. Sometimes your instincts are right. And sometimes the smartest thing you can do is walk away before you learn exactly how close you were to becoming part of the story yourself.